This is wood avens, also known as herb bennet, a really common plant in the rose family. It will grow pretty much anywhere, especially in woodlands and hedgerows, and if you allow wild plants to grow in your garden, there's a good chance you'll have some there. It's a really useful plant that's edible and has medicinal uses. The basal leaves can be found all year and they grow in a rosette, and they have 3 large lobes at the end of the leaf, and if you see on their own they look fairly similar to strawberry leaves, and this plant is quite closely related to strawberry. And then down the stem they'll have several pairs of smaller leaflets. I use these greens cooked and mixed with other greens or added into soups, and I'll also use them raw in smoothies along with dandelion greens and a few fruits. So in the spring and summer this plant can grow up to around 60 centimetres in the right conditions, and it will have flowers with 5 yellow petals. I also use the roots of wood avens. Now I don't know much about herbal medicine and remedies, but this is one that I've used and have benefited from, because these roots can be used as a mild anaesthetic. Right back at the start of the first lockdown I broke my wisdom tooth and I couldn't get to see a dentist because it wasn't seen as an emergency. So for months I was in pain and I had an exposed nerve. I tried all different types of medicine and nothing really worked, but I read online that you can use the roots of this plant as a mild pain relief, so I thought I'd give it a go. So I harvested some of these roots, gave them a bit of a wash and clean up, and made them into a paste with a pestle and mortar, just adding a bit of water, and then I applied the paste directly onto the tooth, and it worked better than anything else I've tried. It gave me quite good pain relief for half an hour to an hour each time I used it. The first thing you'll notice when you pull these roots up is the smell, and they smell exactly like cloves. If you've ever cooked with cloves you'll recognise that smell straight away. And this plant and clove contain the same chemical compound, eugenol, which is an anaesthetic. So these roots are a mass of tangled thin threads, and they usually have one thicker taproot. But I use all of the roots, the taproot and the thinner threads as well. And if you just scrape off a bit of the outer layer with your fingernail and smell it, you'll get a really strong smell of clove. As well as for pain relief, these roots can be used for flavouring in the same way as cloves. I use them in chutneys and in pickling spice mixes. They're best used fresh, but you can dry them as well. And the roots can be harvested any time of year, but they're best in the winter and early spring. These funny looking little things are wood ears or jelly ear fungus, and these are one of the easiest edible mushrooms to find in the winter. They do grow all year round, but they are more common in the winter, and they almost exclusively grow on dead or dying elder like this. So if you can find a patch of elder trees in the winter, and there's a good chance that you'll find wood ear mushrooms. This is my favourite patch for wood ear mushrooms because there's loads of elder scattered around on the floor, which is just covered in wood ear mushrooms. So it's really important to learn your trees if you want to find mushrooms. I've got a video on the common trees of the UK, which I'll link in the description. But elder has very light coloured wood, almost looks bleached, and the bark is very soft and corky, and you can make an indentation quite easily with your thumbnail. And it's very common for the bark to be covered in moss. And you can see they really do look like ears. And they have a very soft, rubbery or jelly-like texture. Here's a nice patch of them. So the mushrooms are cup-shaped, and the inside surface of the mushroom is the surface that produces spores, and this surface always faces down towards the ground, so the spores can just be dropped and then blown away by the wind. So they're downward facing cups, and this is quite an important identification feature. The only mushroom that I really ever see get confused with these wood ears are the Peziza fungi, some of which can be mildly toxic. First of all, the Peziza have quite a thinner flesh than the wood ears, and also they grow straight out of the ground rather than out of wood. And importantly, the cups of Peziza will be facing upwards rather than downwards like the wood ears. These are about the standard size that you'll find wood ears, usually about 5 centimetres or more across the cap. But occasionally you'll find them quite a lot bigger, maybe 2 or 3 times the size of these. These ones here are about the biggest that I've found. I mostly use wood ears in stir fries, shredded into fine ribbons. They don't have much of a flavour by themselves, but I marinate them in soy sauce, rice wine vinegar and gochujang, which is a Korean fermented chili paste. Be careful when cooking wood ears from fresh. Don't just chuck them into hot oil. Because they have quite a high water content, they can explode in hot oil. So they're best finely shredded or placed into cold oil. They're also a really good mushroom for dehydrating. They go quite dark and very thin when dehydrated. So they're good for adding into soups and stews. Sometimes you'll find them like this on the tree, and this is basically what they go like when they're dehydrated. They're quite a lot darker and they're quite rigid and crispy. So these are absolutely fine to use. In fact, they're probably better if you're going to dehydrate them, then they're pretty much there already. So this is what they'll look like in the shops. You can buy these in a lot of like Asian supermarkets, just usually labelled as black fungus. Earlier in the year we looked at harvesting the stems, flower buds and seeds of Alexanders. The seeds will usually persist all winter, and this time of year you can see they go almost completely black. And these seeds look and taste just like peppercorns, and I actually prefer them in the winter like this rather than when they're still green. They can taste a little bit acidic when they're green, but like this, they're really nice. So in the past, peppercorns used to be really expensive, so these were often used as a substitute. I collect a good amount of these in the winter, dry them and store them for using throughout the year. Alexander's is a very early plant, and you can pick the nice fresh shoots throughout the winter, and by January there's a lot of these shoots. So these nice fresh bright green shoots like this where the leaves haven't fully opened. I don't bother with these sorts of leaves. Once they're fully opened, they're not so good, but these ones make a good sort of spinach substitute. You can have them raw or cooked. They've got a fairly unusual bitter flavour that, if you're not used to it, can be a bit off-putting, but I've been eating this for a lot of years now and I quite enjoy it. I think it's just kind of getting used to the flavour. You do have to be really careful with this plant though. You have to be 100% sure that you haven't got hemlock water dropwort, which can look a little bit similar. I've done a few videos on identifying hemlock water dropwort, and that is one of the most deadly poisonous plants in the world, so yeah, you have to be really, really careful. You can usually find quite nice big patches of Alexanders, and for each plant just go right into the centre, and these are the sort of shoots that you want. Even in midwinter you can still harvest nice fresh greens. If you're struggling to find wild foods in the winter, then I suggest you take a trip to the coast or an estuary if you can, because even in midwinter it's pretty abundant here. Somewhere out there behind me is the sea. You can't really see because it's quite foggy at the moment, but that acts kind of like a battery. It stores up the heat from the sun in the warmer months and then releases it during the winter. So by the coast it's always a few degrees warmer in the winter than further inland. So that means there's a longer growing season, if not all year. And that, paired with the fact that coastlines are usually more fertile ground anyway, it means that there's a good chance you can fill up a basket of wild food during the winter. So let's go see what we can find. And you especially want to look at rocky outcrops like this by the sea, because these are like supermarkets for wild food. Here's some lovely rock samphire that I talked about in June. You can normally find some smaller flushes like this during the winter, but the main flush is in the early summer. And there's also loads of this lovely sea beet and sea aster, both of which I've covered already in this series. And we've even got some really young sea plantain that's just starting to sprout. I actually really like it at this stage. They're just like a little salty snack. These rock faces and the ground around it are absolutely covered in good wild foods. There's plenty of food around in winter to forage if you know where to look. And all in amongst the rocks here is another good edible. This is pennywort, Umbilicus rupestris, also known as wall pennywort and navelwort, because it's got a belly button like depression in the centre of the leaf. Pennywort is from the stonecrop or Crassulaceae family. It'll grow anywhere rocky and damp. So these patches are by the coast, but it's just as common inland where there's exposed rock, or it also grows on stone walls. It's found all year, but I find they're better in winter and spring. It's a very succulent plant and the leaves are quite juicy. They've got a flavour between a sweet lettuce and fresh broad beans. Later in the year they can go a bit bitter, so it's better to get them now. I usually eat them raw as a salad garnish, and you can also fry them in butter, and I like to use them in smoothies too. They're highly nutritious and have traditionally been used to treat inflammation. The leaves of pennywort are usually around 4 to 5 centimetres across, but they can grow up to around 10 centimetres. They have scalloped margins, and as I said before, the leaves are quite succulent and they have a navel depression in the centre of the leaf. They grow from quite thick stems, and they're quite shallowly rooted into the rock, so just be very careful when you pick them that you don't uproot the whole plant. I just kind of snip them between my thumb and finger like that. They're quite a distinctive looking plant. As long as they're growing in quite big patches like this, out of rock, the leaves are succulent and have that navel depression, there's not really anything that you'll mistake this for. It's a plant that usually when you find some, you'll find a lot of it, and I found patches like this that can go on for hundreds of metres along bare rock faces. And especially in Wales, it seems to be the perfect habitat for this. Yeah, delicious. There's just something about wild foods like this. You can just taste how much more nutritious they are than shop-bought vegetables.